He'll never find out. That was the sentence that ended my marriage, and the worst part is, she said it less than 3 feet away from me while I was lying right beside her in our own bed. I didn't move when I heard it. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't even breathe. I just listened. The room was dark except for the faint glow of her phone lighting up the side of her face, a soft blue reflection flickering against the wall like something out of a quiet storm. It was close to 2 o'clock in the morning, the kind of hour where everything feels heavier, where even the smallest sound carries weight. Emily had slipped out of bed slowly, careful, practiced. That should have been my first clue. But I stayed still, because something in the way she moved didn't feel random. It felt intentional. Controlled. Like she'd done it before. I kept my eyes closed, my body relaxed, the steady rhythm of fake sleep, something I'd learned over years of long workdays and early mornings. But inside, something had already started to shift. You don't expect your life to split open in a quiet moment like that. No yelling. No slammed doors. Just a whisper. I heard the soft click of her phone unlocking, then her voice, barely above a breath. He'll never find out. There was a pause after that. Not silence exactly, but the kind of quiet where you know someone else is on the other end. Listening. Waiting. My chest tightened, but I kept it steady. Slow inhale. Slow exhale. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A joke. A misunderstanding. Something harmless. But then she laughed. Soft. Light. Familiar. The same laugh she used when she was comfortable, when she felt safe. It didn't belong in that moment. Not at 2 a.m. Not whispered into a phone she thought I couldn't hear. I felt something cold settle deep in my chest, like a switch flipping from confusion to awareness. I didn't move. I couldn't. Because the second I did, the moment would be gone, and whatever truth was about to reveal itself would disappear with it. So I stayed there, completely still, staring into the darkness behind my eyelids while every sense I had focused on her voice. The mattress dipped slightly as she shifted her weight, turning her back toward me. Creating distance. Not physical distance. Something else. Something deliberate. I told you, she whispered again, softer this time, almost amused. He trusts me. That word hit differently. Trust. It echoed in my head in a way I couldn't ignore. Because she wasn't guessing. She wasn't hoping. She knew. And that confidence didn't come from nowhere. It came from repetition. From history. From something already in motion long before this night. I felt my jaw tighten just slightly, but I forced it to relax. Every instinct in me wanted to sit up, to grab the phone, to demand answers. But something stronger held me in place. Something quieter. The need to know everything. Not just the part she was willing to admit. The whole truth. Her voice dropped lower after that, almost too soft to catch, but I didn't miss the tone. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't guilty. It was comfortable. And that's what hurt the most. Because whatever this was, it wasn't new. It wasn't a mistake. It was routine. I lay there in the dark, completely still, listening to my wife talk to someone who wasn't me, and in that moment, I realized something I couldn't take back. I wasn't the man she was protecting anymore. I was the man she was hiding things from. And the worst part? She thought I was asleep. She thought I'd never hear it. But I heard everything. I stayed exactly where I was, counting the seconds between her breaths like it meant something, like if I could measure it I could control it. But there was nothing to control anymore, only something to understand, and that difference changed everything, because once you stop reacting and start observing, the world looks very different. Her voice dipped again, softer, almost like she was smiling into the phone, and I caught fragments. Not full sentences at first, just pieces that did not belong in a marriage. Tomorrow works, she whispered, followed by a quiet pause, then a small laugh that sounded too easy, too natural for something that was supposed to be hidden. I focused harder, blocking out everything else, the hum of the air vent, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, even my own heartbeat. I tuned. it all out until it was just her voice and the silence around it. "No, he will be at work," she said, clearer this time, and that was the moment the last piece of denial slipped away, because that was not a misunderstanding, that was planning, simple and precise, and the calmness in her tone made it worse. There was no hesitation, no guilt, just certainty, like she had already run through this conversation 100 times before. I felt something tighten in my chest again, not sharp, not explosive, just a steady pressure building, the kind that does not go away, the kind that stays with you, reshaping everything you thought was solid. I thought about all the nights I had stayed late at the office, all the mornings I had left early, trusting that what we had was stable, that routine meant safety. But now those same routines felt like openings, like gaps I had left unguarded without even realizing it. She shifted again beside me, the mattress dipping slightly as she leaned forward, maybe resting on her elbow, maybe lowering her voice even more, but I could still hear enough. "You worry too much," she murmured, almost teasing. "I told you, he has no idea." And that word again, idea, like I was something outside of the equation, something predictable, manageable. I kept my breathing slow, even, forcing my body to stay in character, because the moment I broke, the moment I showed any sign that I was awake, all of this would vanish into explanations and excuses, and I was not ready for that, not yet. I needed the truth without filters, without edits, exactly as it was when she thought no one was listening. Time stretched in a strange way after that, seconds felt longer, heavier, every word she spoke seemed to land slower, clearer, like my mind was recording everything whether I wanted it to or not, and then I heard something that shifted the ground again. "Same place as last time," she said, barely above a whisper, and there it was, confirmation that this was not new, not a one-time mistake, but a pattern, something with a past, something with repetition. I did not react, not externally, but inside, something settled, something colder, more focused, because now this was no longer a question, it was a reality, one I could not ignore or explain away. Her tone softened after that, quieter, more personal, words blending together in a way that made them harder to catch, but I did not need every detail anymore. I had enough, more than enough. The rest was just confirmation of what had already been decided in that moment. She ended the call a minute later. The soft click of the screen going dark echoing louder than it should have, and then silence returned to the room, heavy and complete, like nothing had happened, like the world had not just shifted under my feet. She lay back down slowly, careful again, controlled, her body settling into the bed as if she had never left it, as if she had been there the whole time, and for a second, I wondered how many nights had looked exactly like this without me ever knowing, how many times I had been right there and still completely unaware. Her breathing steadied beside me, slow and even, the rhythm of someone falling back to sleep, or at least pretending to, and I realized something else in that quiet, something that surprised even me. I was not angry, not yet. I was awake in a way I had not been before, alert, focused, and for the first time that night, I understood that whatever came next was not going to be about confrontation, it was going to be about control, because she thought she was the one managing the situation. She thought she was the one staying ahead, but lying there in the dark, completely still, I knew that had just changed, and she had no idea. Morning came like it always did, quiet and ordinary, sunlight bleeding through the blinds and thin lines across the bedroom wall, the kind of light that used to mean a fresh start, but now it just exposed everything I could not unhear. I opened my eyes slowly, careful not to break the rhythm, and turned my head just enough to see her. Emily was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with her back to me, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened, like the night before was just another normal evening. Her posture relaxed, shoulders loose, completely at ease, and that was the detail that stayed with me, not tension, not guilt, just comfort, like she had nothing to worry about. I pushed myself up with a quiet stretch, forcing a yawn, playing the part so naturally it almost surprised me. "Morning," I said, my voice steady, unchanged, the same voice I had used for years. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled, soft, familiar, the same smile that used to mean something. "Morning," she replied, casual, easy, like we were still exactly who we had been yesterday, and for a second, I studied her face, searching for something different, a crack, a hesitation, anything that would confirm what I already knew, but there was nothing, just the same Emily, composed and polished, her phone locked and placed face down on the nightstand in one smooth motion, practiced, subtle. I nodded, standing up and heading toward the bathroom, keeping everything normal, because normal was my advantage now, inside. The mirror reflected a version of me that looked exactly the same eyes, same expression, but something behind it had shifted, something quieter, more controlled. I turned on the faucet and let the water run longer than necessary, giving myself a moment to think, not about what happened, but about what came next, because reacting was easy, anyone could react, but control required patience, and patience was what I had now. When I walked back into the bedroom, she was already dressed, moving through her routine with that same effortless rhythm, coffee brewing downstairs, the faint smell drifting up through the house, everything in place, everything predictable, and suddenly I realized how much I relied on that predictability, how much I had trusted it without question. "You have a full day today?" I asked, keeping my tone light, neutral. She nodded, grabbing her bag. "Yeah, meetings all morning, probably late afternoon too," she said without hesitation, no pause, no recalculation, just an answer ready to go. And I wondered how many of those answers had been rehearsed, how many times she had said something similar without me ever thinking twice about it. I picked up my keys from the dresser, nodding like it all made sense, like I believed every word. "I might be tied up at the office too," I added, watching her reaction carefully. She smiled again, quick, approving. "Of course you are," she said, almost amused, and there it was again. That same confidence I had heard the night before, the certainty that she understood my routine better than I did, that she could predict where I would be without even asking. We walked downstairs together, the normal rhythm of our mornings playing out like nothing had changed, coffee poured, small talk exchanged, the kind of conversation that fills space without meaning anything, and I matched it perfectly, every nod, every response, every glance timed just right, because the moment I slipped, the moment something felt off, the entire dynamic would shift, and I was not ready for that yet, not until I had everything, not until I understood the full picture. She grabbed her coat by the door, slipping it on with that same effortless motion. And as she reached for her keys, she leaned in and kissed my cheek, light, routine, the kind of gesture that used to ground me, but now felt like part of a script. "See you tonight," she said, already halfway out the door. And I smiled, the same smile I had given her 1,000 times before. "Yeah, see you tonight," I replied, watching her leave, the door closing softly behind her, the house falling quiet in her absence, and for the first time since the night before, I let the silence sit without pretending. I stood there for a moment, keys in my hand, coffee growing cold on the counter, and I replayed every word, every tone, every detail from that call, not as a memory, but as evidence. Because that is what it was now, not something to process emotionally, but something to build on, something to use. I walked back upstairs slowly, deliberate, and stopped at the bedroom door, looking at the space we shared, the bed, the nightstand. The place where everything had changed without her even realizing it, and that was when the plan started to form, not all at once, not fully, but enough to know the direction, enough to understand that this was no longer about what she had done. It was about what I was going to do next, because she thought she was ahead, she thought she was careful. But she made one mistake, she let me hear it, and now I was awake in a way she could not see, and that made all the difference. I did not go to the office that day, not right away. Instead I sat in my car in the driveway for a full 10 minutes after she left, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at nothing, because for the first time in years, my routine was not guiding me. I was choosing what came next, and that shift mattered more than anything else. I pulled my phone out slowly and checked the time, 8:17 in the morning. She would be halfway to her office by now, maybe already there, maybe already stepping into that version of her life that I had never questioned before, and that thought settled in deeper than I expected, because it was not just about what she had done, it was about how easily she moved between two realities without missing a step. I started the car but did not drive far, just a few blocks down, parking near a small Coffee shop we had been to dozens of times, a place that used to feel familiar, safe, predictable. Now it just felt like a neutral ground, somewhere I could think without being inside that house. I walked in, ordered the same black coffee I always did, and sat by the window, watching people move through their normal mornings, unaware of anything outside their own routines, and I realized something simple but important. Life does not pause when yours shifts, it keeps moving, steady, indifferent. I took a slow sip of coffee and let the bitterness settle, matching the clarity in my head, because now it was not about emotion, it was about information, patterns, details, the kind of things I had ignored before because I trusted her, and that trust had made me blind. I pulled out my phone again and opened our shared calendar, something we had used for years to keep track of schedules, dinners, appointments. The structure of our lives laid out in neat blocks of time, and suddenly it looked different, not like a plan, but like a map, gaps between meetings, unexplained time slots, late afternoons marked as busy, without specifics. I scrolled slowly, carefully, looking for repetition, for consistency, and it did not take long to see it. Certain days each week where her schedule was lighter, certain hours where she was unavailable without explanation, and that was when the pattern started to form, not perfect, not complete, but enough to suggest something intentional. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly, because this was the part most people skip, the part where you gather instead of react, where you observe instead of confront, and I knew if I rushed it, I would lose the advantage I had just gained. I needed more than suspicion, I needed certainty, something undeniable, something that could not be explained away with a smile and a simple excuse. I checked her social media next, something I rarely paid attention to. Her posts were the same as always, polished, curated, nothing out of place, pictures from last weekend, captions that sounded warm, normal. The kind of life people liked and commented on without thinking twice, and that was the point, everything on the surface was exactly how it was supposed to be, which meant whatever was happening existed beneath that surface, hidden in places most people never think to look. I finished my coffee and stood up, my mind clearer than it had been in a long time, not because I felt better, but because I understood the direction. I walked back to my car and sat there for a moment, one hand resting on the wheel again. But this time there was no hesitation, only intention. I knew I could not follow her blindly. Not yet, not without a plan, but I could start with something simple, something controlled. I drove home instead of going to work, the house exactly as we left it, quiet, unchanged, and I moved through it slowly, deliberately, noticing things I had overlooked before, the way her laptop was always closed when I walked in, the way her phone never left her side, the small habits that once meant nothing now carried weight. I stepped into the bedroom and looked at the nightstand, her side, the place where her phone had rested just hours ago, and I stood there for a second, thinking not about what I wanted to find, but about how to find it without breaking the illusion, because that illusion was my greatest asset now. As long as she believed I knew nothing, she would keep acting the same, and that consistency would reveal more than any confrontation ever could. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped loosely, and made a quiet decision in that moment. I was not going to ask questions, I was not going to accuse, I was going to watch, listen, and build something she could not see coming. Because she thought the night before was just another secret moment, another conversation that disappeared into the dark, but it was not, it was the beginning of something else entirely, and she had no idea I was already steps ahead. I did not touch her phone that day, not even once, even though it sat there on the nightstand when she got home that evening, screen lighting up every so often with notifications she dismissed without hesitation, because this was not about grabbing the first piece of evidence I could find. This was about understanding the system she was operating in, and systems always leave patterns if you are patient enough to watch them. Dinner that night was exactly what it always was, simple, quiet, the kind of routine that makes everything feel stable. She talked about her meetings, I nodded in the right places, asked the right questions, played the same role I had always played, and the strange part was how easy it felt, like nothing inside me was pushing to break that rhythm. Because I knew breaking it too early would cost me more than staying silent. She laughed once at something I said, light and natural, and for a second it almost pulled me back into the version of us that existed before that night. But then I remembered her voice in the dark, the way she whispered, the certainty in her tone, and that moment passed just as quickly as it came. After dinner she moved to the couch, phone in hand again, scrolling, typing occasionally, her expression calm, focused, not hiding anything. At least not on the surface, and that was the detail that mattered most. She was not acting differently, which meant whatever she was doing was already integrated into her routine, already normalized in her mind. I sat across from her, television on but muted, watching her more than anything else, not in an obvious way, just enough to notice timing, frequency, small changes in posture, every time her phone lit up, every time she glanced down, every time her fingers moved across the screen. It was not constant, not excessive, just controlled, measured, like someone who knew exactly how much was too much. Around 9:30 she stood up and stretched, casual, unhurried. "I am going to take a shower," she said the same way she always did, and I nodded without looking up. "Go ahead," my voice steady, uninterested on the surface. But inside I was already moving ahead, already thinking 2 steps forward. The sound of the bathroom door closing echoed softly down the hallway, followed by the familiar rush of water starting, and that was the first real opportunity, not because I planned to go through her phone, but because patterns become clearer when one part of the system is temporarily removed. I stood up slowly, walking past the couch without rushing, glancing at where she had been sitting, the blanket slightly folded, her phone not there, which meant she had taken it with her. Another detail, another confirmation, she never left it unattended, not even for a few minutes. I walked into the kitchen instead, pouring myself a glass of water I did not really want, standing there listening to the house, the steady sound of running water upstairs, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the quiet that fills a space when someone else believes everything is normal. And that was when I realized something important. Whatever she was doing required consistency, not just in action, but in environment. She relied on the predictability of our life to keep things hidden, which meant if I changed that predictability too abruptly, she would notice, she would adjust, and I would lose the advantage I had. So the plan needed to be subtle, gradual, something that fit into the same routine she trusted. I walked back into the living room and sat down again. This time picking up my own phone, not to distract myself, but to begin laying the groundwork. I opened a notes app and started writing, not emotions, not reactions, just facts, times, phrases, small observations, the kind of details that seem insignificant alone but become powerful when connected. I wrote down the time she went to the shower, the frequency of her messages, the way she held her phone angled slightly away from me, the small pause before she answered certain questions, each line short, precise, controlled, because clarity matters when you are building something like this. The water upstairs shut off a few minutes later, and I locked my phone immediately, setting it down as if nothing had happened, because nothing could look different. Not yet. She came back down wrapped in a towel, moving through the room with the same ease, picking up her phone without even thinking about it, her attention returning to it almost instantly. And I realized then that I was no longer trying to figure out if something was happening. I was mapping how it was happening, step by step, layer by layer, until there was no room left for doubt. And as I sat there watching her scroll, her face lit by the soft glow of that screen, I understood that this was going to take time, but time was something I was willing to invest, because when the truth finally came together, it would not be a question, it would be undeniable, and she would never see it coming. The next morning I followed the same routine again, but this time everything felt sharper, like I was finally seeing the structure behind the surface. I left the house at the usual time, same pace, same posture, same casual goodbye. But instead of driving straight to the office, I took a different route, slower, more deliberate, because now I was not just living inside the routine, I was studying it from the outside. I parked 2 blocks away from her office building, far enough to avoid being obvious, close enough to observe without effort, and I sat there with the engine off, hands resting calmly, eyes fixed on the entrance across the street. People moved in and out. Employees with coffee cups, phones pressed to their ears, the rhythm of a normal weekday unfolding exactly as expected. And then I saw her. Emily stepped out of her car, same confident walk, same composed expression, everything aligned with the version of her that the world saw. She adjusted her bag, checked her phone once, then walked into the building without hesitation, no sign of anything unusual, no signal that she was balancing two lives at once, and that was the point. Whatever she was doing was not happening here, not in plain sight, it was happening in the spaces between, the gaps I had started to notice the day before. I waited for another 15 minutes. Watching the entrance, confirming there was no immediate deviation, then I pulled out my phone and opened the notes again, adding timestamps, small confirmations, reinforcing the pattern I was building, because every consistent behavior narrowed the variables, and fewer variables meant clearer answers. I drove away slowly after that, not rushing, not lingering, just moving on like any other morning, and for the first time, I did not feel the urge to check on her constantly. Because I understood something now, this was not about catching a single moment, it was about mapping a sequence, and sequences require patience. I arrived at the office later than usual, offering a simple explanation about traffic, nothing unusual, nothing that would draw attention, and I moved through my workday like I always did, but my focus was divided, part of me handling tasks, conversations, meetings, the other part running calculations in the background, connecting details, refining assumptions. Around lunchtime I stepped outside, found a quiet spot, and reviewed everything again, the late-night call, the calendar gaps, her controlled behavior with the phone, the consistency in her routine. It all pointed in one direction, but I needed something concrete, something that linked time and place together, because without that, everything was still circumstantial, and circumstantial could be explained away. I checked her shared location status briefly, something we had enabled years ago for convenience. It showed her at the office, exactly where she was supposed to be, but I did not rely on that alone, because convenience tools only show what they are meant to show, not what is hidden behind them. I locked my phone and leaned back, exhaling slowly, because this was the part where most people make a mistake. They push too fast, they act on incomplete information, and they lose the advantage. But I was not going to do that. I had already come too far to rush it now. The afternoon passed quietly, and when I got home later that evening, she was already there, sitting at the kitchen counter with her laptop open, typing, her phone beside it, everything exactly where it should be. "Long day?" I asked, setting my keys down. She looked up and smiled, the same calm expression. "Yeah, meetings ran over," she said, and I nodded like it made sense, like it always had. But now I heard it differently, not as an explanation, but as a placeholder, a simple cover for time that needed to be accounted for. I moved through the kitchen, grabbing a glass, keeping everything smooth, controlled, because nothing about this moment could feel different, not yet. We talked about dinner, about small things, about nothing that mattered, and all the while I watched, not her words, but her timing, the way she checked her phone when she thought I was not looking, the slight shift in her posture when a message came through, the almost invisible pause before she responded. These were not random, they were consistent, and consistency is what builds certainty. Later that night, as we sat in the living room again, the same positions, the same quiet television, I realized something else. I did not need to chase the truth anymore. It was already moving in a predictable pattern. All I had to do was stay in sync with it long enough to see where it led, and as I glanced over at her, the soft light from her screen reflecting in her eyes, I knew that whatever she was planning, wherever those hidden hours were leading her, I was getting closer, and she still believed I was exactly where she left me, unaware, predictable, asleep. But I was not anymore. By the third day, the pattern stopped being theory and started becoming something I could follow, something real. I did not need to guess anymore, I just needed to confirm, and confirmation came from consistency. That morning played out like the others, same calm tone, same routine, same controlled movements, but this time I was not watching from a distance. I was aligning my timing with hers, step by step, minute by minute. I left the house a few minutes after she did, not immediately, not suspiciously, just enough to stay behind the rhythm she expected, and instead of going toward my office, I positioned myself along a route that connected the gaps I had identified, the hours she labeled as meetings, the time she said she would be unavailable. The pieces that did not fully match, and I waited, not with impatience, but with clarity, because now I understood something important. She was not careless, she was consistent, and consistency always leaves a trail. Around mid-afternoon, right within one of those unaccounted time blocks, I saw it happen. Her car pulled into a parking lot that was not near her office, not near any place she had ever mentioned, a quiet location, the kind of place that blends into everything else, nothing remarkable. Which made it perfect. I stayed far enough back to remain unnoticed. My position fixed, my movements minimal, because the last thing I needed was to disrupt the moment I had been building toward. She stepped out of the car calmly, checking her phone once, the same habit, the same posture, everything controlled, and then she walked toward the entrance of a small cafe, not one we had ever been to, not one she had ever talked about, just another piece of the map falling into place. I watched from across the street, my hands steady, my breathing even, because this was not the time for emotion, this was the time for observation. A few minutes passed, and then I saw him, not from her car, not from her office, but from a different direction entirely. He approached the cafe entrance with the kind of confidence that comes from familiarity, like he had been there before, like this was not new for him either. He paused for a second outside, checking his phone, and then walked inside without hesitation, and I did not need anything else in that moment to understand the connection. The timing alone was enough, the coordination, the precision, the way both of them moved without delay, like they were following a schedule they both knew by heart. I did not follow them inside. I did not need to, because the truth was already clear in the sequence, in the alignment of time and place, in the fact that none of this existed in the version of reality she had been showing me. I sat there in the car, watching the door they had both entered, and for the first time since that night, something settled completely, not confusion, not doubt, but certainty. Because now it was no longer about what I thought might be happening, it was about what I had seen, what I had confirmed with my own eyes, and that changed everything. I stayed there longer than necessary, not because I expected more, but because I wanted to absorb every detail, the location, the timing, the structure of it, how easily it fit into the gaps she had created, and how invisible it would have been if I had not been looking for it. Eventually I started the car and drove away slowly, not in a rush, not reacting, just moving forward, because now the situation had shifted again. I was no longer searching for proof. I had it. What I needed now was to decide how to use it, and that decision required the same thing that had brought me this far: control, patience, precision. When I got home that evening, everything was the same as always. She was already there, moving through the kitchen, preparing dinner, the normal rhythm playing out without interruption. She looked up and smiled when I walked in, the same expression, the same tone. "You are home early," she said, and I nodded, setting my keys down like nothing had changed. "Yeah, finished up sooner than expected," I replied, my voice steady, calm, completely aligned with the version of me she believed in. And as I watched her move around the kitchen, as I listened to her talk about her day, the same day I had just seen from a completely different angle, I realized something else. She was not just hiding something, she was living inside a carefully constructed narrative, one that depended entirely on me staying exactly where she thought I was: predictable, unaware, trusting. And the moment that changed, the entire structure would collapse. But I was not going to collapse it yet, not until I had everything in place, not until I was ready. Because now this was no longer about discovering the truth, it was about what came after. And she still had no idea that the moment she stepped into that cafe, everything had already started to shift beyond her control. I did not return to that cafe the next day, and I did not follow her again either, not because I doubted what I had seen, but because repeating the same move would risk turning observation into suspicion, and that was something I could not afford. Instead, I stayed inside the routine she trusted, letting her believe everything was still exactly where she left it, predictable, stable, unchanged, because the more comfortable she felt, the more consistent she would be, and consistency was still my greatest advantage. That evening she mentioned another busy day ahead, something about meetings running long again, her tone casual, effortless, the same explanation she had used before. And I nodded like it made perfect sense, like I had no reason to question it. This time I was not just listening to what she said, I was measuring how she said it, the pacing, the confidence, the absence of hesitation, and it matched perfectly with the pattern I had already mapped, which meant tomorrow would not be different. It would follow the same structure, the same hidden gap, the same quiet space where her other life existed. I spent that night refining everything I had gathered. Sitting alone in the living room after she went upstairs, phone in hand, notes open. Reviewing each detail like pieces of a system that was finally complete, the timestamps aligned, the location made sense, the behavior matched the pattern, and for the first time since this started, I reached a point where there were no more unknowns, only decisions. I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling, letting that realization settle in, because once you remove uncertainty, what remains is responsibility. Responsibility for what you do next, and that is where most people lose control. They let emotion take over, they react, they confront, they demand answers, but I had come too far to let that happen now. I needed to stay exactly where I was, calm, measured, precise, because what I was building was not just about proving something, it was about ending something on my terms. The next morning I followed through with that decision, same routine, same departure, same calm tone, everything aligned with what she expected, but internally, I had already moved past observation into preparation. I contacted a lawyer during my lunch break, nothing dramatic, just a quiet consultation. A conversation built on facts, timelines, and evidence, no speculation, no emotion, just clarity. And the response I received confirmed what I already understood, that documentation mattered, that patterns mattered, that consistency could become something concrete if handled correctly. I left that meeting with a sense of direction that felt different from everything before, not reactive, not uncertain, but structured, controlled, the way everything else had become since that night. When I got home later that evening, she was already there again, moving through the kitchen, the same rhythm, the same normalcy, and I realized how powerful that normalcy was, how much it depended on my participation, because without it, the entire illusion would fall apart. "Another long day?" I asked, placing my keys down, and she smiled, the same answer ready. "Yeah, you know how it is," she said, and I nodded, playing my role perfectly, because now I understood something she did not. This was not just her routine, it was ours, and I was the one choosing to keep it intact, at least for now. We sat down for dinner, the same small talk, the same quiet exchanges, everything exactly as it had always been, but underneath it, everything had already changed. I watched her carefully, not for signs of guilt, but for confirmation of consistency, and she delivered exactly that. Every gesture, every response, every glance at her phone matched the pattern I had built, and that consistency told me something important. She had no idea anything was different. She believed the system was still intact, still working, still invisible, and that belief was what allowed me to move forward without resistance. Later that night, as she scrolled through her phone on the couch, the soft light reflecting across her face, I sat across from her, completely still, completely calm, and I realized that this moment, this quiet, ordinary moment, was the last time things would ever feel this way, because everything was already in motion, not on her side, but on mine, and she did not see it, she could not see it, because she was still looking at the version of me she thought she understood, predictable, trusting, unaware. But that version no longer existed, and by the time she realized that, it would already be too late to change anything. The next move did not happen in the middle of the night, or in some dramatic confrontation. It happened on a quiet Thursday evening, the kind of night that looks exactly like every other night until it does not. Dinner was already finished, dishes cleaned, the house settled into that familiar calm that had carried us for years. Emily sat on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling with that same relaxed focus. And I took my seat across from her like I always did, same posture, same calm expression, because this moment needed to feel normal to her, completely unremarkable. I let a few minutes pass, letting the silence stretch just enough, the television casting soft light across the room, her attention locked on the screen in her hand, and then I spoke, not loudly, not sharply, just enough to shift the air between us. "How was the cafe?" I said, my voice steady, almost casual, and for the first time since this began, Something changed. It was small, almost invisible, but I saw it, the way her thumb stopped mid-scroll, the way her shoulders tightened just slightly before she even looked up, and that was the moment the structure she had built started to crack. She lifted her eyes slowly, confusion forming first, not fear, not yet, just confusion. "What cafe?" she asked, her tone controlled, but not as smooth as before, and I held her gaze for a second, just long enough to let the question sit, not answering immediately, because silence has a way of pulling truth to the surface. "The one you went to on Tuesday at 2:17 in the afternoon," I said, same tone, same calm delivery, no accusation, just a statement, and that was when everything shifted. The confusion faded, replaced by something sharper, something more aware, because now she understood this was not a guess, this was not suspicion, this was knowledge. She set her phone down slowly, too carefully, buying time. "I think you are mistaken," she replied, but the confidence was gone, replaced by calculation, and I nodded slightly, like I expected that answer, because I did. "Maybe," I said, leaning back just a little, keeping everything relaxed. "Or maybe I am thinking about the same place where you met him, the one you coordinated with before you left the office." And I watched her closely, not for a reaction, but for the absence of control, because that was what mattered now, not what she said, but what she could no longer manage. The room felt different after that, not louder, not tense, just heavier, like the weight of everything unsaid had finally settled between us. She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it again, searching for something, a response, a version of the truth that could still hold the structure together, but there was nothing left to build with, because I had already removed the uncertainty. "I did not say anything before," I continued, my voice still even, still controlled, "because I wanted to understand, not react." And that was the part that landed, not as an attack, but as a conclusion, because everything I had done up to that point had led here, not to accuse, but to reveal that I already knew. She looked at me differently then, not as the man she thought she understood, but as someone else entirely, someone who had been present the entire time without her realizing it, and that shift in her perception was the real turning point, because once that changes, everything else follows. I stood up slowly, not in anger, not in frustration, just in decision. "You thought I would never find out," I said quietly, not as a question, but as a reflection of what she had believed, and I paused for a second, letting that settle. "But I heard everything." And in that moment, there was nothing left to explain, nothing left to deny, because the truth was no longer hidden in whispers or patterns. It was right there between us, clear, undeniable, and final. I walked past her without waiting for a response, without asking for one, because this was never about getting answers from her. It was about reaching a point where I no longer needed them. And as I moved through the house, the same space that had once felt stable, I realized something simple and absolute. The night I pretended to sleep was the night everything changed, not because of what she said, but because of what I chose to do after I heard it. And now there was no going back, not for her, and not for me.